My wife betrayed me in ways I never imagined, stealing my secrets, my trust, and my heart. But what I did next left her with nothing. You won't believe how it all ends. For the past 8 years, Sophia and I had been the definition of a power couple. She was the stunning socialite with a knack for charming even the coldest hearts, while I was the quiet tech genius who had turned an innovative idea into a multimillion-dollar company. From the outside, our life looked perfect: lavish parties, exotic vacations, and a sprawling smart home equipped with every gadget you could imagine. But lately, something felt off. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. Sophia had begun spending more time away from home, claiming she was networking or attending events to further our brand. At first, I didn't question it. After all, her charisma had opened countless doors for my company, Apex Technologies. But then there were the late-night phone calls, always taken in another room, and the sudden, inexplicable changes in her mood. I told myself it was just stress. Sophia had always thrived in the fast-paced, high-stakes social scene, but even she wasn't immune to burnout. Still, the unease lingered. The tipping point came one rainy Friday evening. I was working late in my home office, debugging a new encryption software for Apex. As I combed through lines of code, a peculiar notification popped up on my desktop. PhotoSync update successful. I frowned. PhotoSync wasn't a program I recognized. Curious, I clicked on it, expecting to see some harmless photo backup app. Instead, the interface opened to reveal an encrypted folder filled with screenshots of emails, spreadsheets, and confidential Apex files. My blood ran cold. At first, I thought I'd been hacked. Apex was no stranger to cyber attacks. Competitors constantly tried to pry into our secrets. But as I dug deeper, the truth began to unravel in a way I couldn't have imagined. The program wasn't just spyware. It was meticulously designed to siphon data directly from my devices. And the user ID associated with the program? S.Winter, Sophia's maiden name. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. Could this really be her? My Sophia, the woman who had stood by my side as I built this empire? I needed answers, but more than that, I needed proof. I closed the program, ensuring it left no trace of my activity, and began setting up a trap. If Sophia was truly behind this, she wouldn't see what was coming next. As I activated the digital countermeasures I had designed to detect espionage, one thought kept echoing in my mind. How deep does this betrayal go? I barely slept that night. The room felt colder, emptier, despite Sophia lying beside me, her breathing steady and serene. It was eerie, like sharing a bed with a stranger. The next morning, I began piecing together the fragments of this revelation. If Sophia was leaking my company's secrets, then who was she giving them to? The encrypted files had been routed through multiple servers, but I traced the IP address of the final destination. When I saw the name tied to it, my hands clenched into fists. Elliot Grayson. He was a competitor, a brash entrepreneur known for his underhanded tactics and meteoric rise in the tech world. Over the years, I'd fought tooth and nail to keep Apex ahead of Grayson's company, Nova Systems. But now, it seemed the enemy wasn't outside my walls. It was in my own home. The trap I set was simple but effective. I installed a stealth program on Sophia's devices, one that mirrored all her activities without alerting her. It would log her calls, track her messages, and even activate her phone's microphone when she was on a business meeting. Within days, the program began to paint a damning picture. Sophia wasn't just passing along files. She was deeply entwined with Elliot, both professionally and personally. Late-night messages about company projects blurred into flirtatious exchanges. Recorded phone calls revealed their plans to undercut Apex at an upcoming tech conference. Then there was the most gut-wrenching evidence. A hotel reservation. She wasn't just betraying me in business. She was betraying me as a husband. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. I closed my laptop and stared at the wall, rage and despair wrestling for dominance in my chest. I thought of the years I'd spent building this life with her, the trust we'd shared, the sacrifices I'd made. Was it all a lie? No. Sophia was going to learn that I wasn't the kind of man who took betrayal lightly. I opened my laptop again and began planning my next move. If she and Elliot thought they could humiliate me, they had no idea what I was capable of. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming everything that was rightfully mine. The weight of Sophia's betrayal grew heavier by the day, but I forced myself to channel the pain into action. Every moment she spent away, every lie she fed me, was another opportunity to refine my plan. I wasn't just going to expose her. I was going to dismantle everything she and Elliot had built together. The first step was targeting Elliot's Achilles heel. Nova Systems' flagship project, a cloud-based AI that promised to revolutionize data analysis. It was set to debut at the upcoming tech conference, and with the stolen Apex data, it was poised to crush my company's own product launch. I couldn't let that happen. Using Sophia's spyware as a conduit, I infiltrated Nova's network. It was almost poetic, using her betrayal to my advantage. Within hours, I had access to their internal communications and development logs. What I found was worse than I expected. They had integrated proprietary Apex algorithms directly into their system. They weren't just stealing, they were plagiarizing Apex's crown jewel. But instead of exposing them outright, I decided to play a longer game. I created a dummy file, a seemingly innocuous update to the stolen algorithm, and planted it in Nova's servers. The code was flawless on the surface, but hidden within was a timed exploit that would cause catastrophic failures in their system during the conference presentation. By the time they realized what had happened, it would be too late to recover. With that piece in place, I turned my attention to Sophia. The surveillance program I'd installed had captured her meeting with Elliot at a luxury hotel downtown. The conversation, as expected, was incriminating. She discussed which files to forward next, how to keep me distracted, and even mocked my blind trust. Hearing her words was a knife to my heart, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I recorded everything. The recordings would be invaluable, not just for personal revenge but for legal leverage. Apex's lawyers would salivate over this evidence, ensuring that both Sophia and Elliot paid the price for their deception. The final piece of the puzzle was a gathering I planned to host at our home, a private party for Apex employees and stakeholders. Sophia, ever the perfect hostess, eagerly took on the role of planner, oblivious to my true intentions. The stage was set. At that party, I would unveil everything: her lies, her affair, her betrayal. But more importantly, I would demonstrate that no one crosses me without consequences. As I watched Sophia flit around the house, confirming catering details and floral arrangements, I felt a grim satisfaction. She had no idea the world she'd carefully curated was about to crumble beneath her feet. The party was set for Saturday evening, just a week before the tech conference. Sophia had outdone herself as usual. Invitations had been sent to Apex's top investors, partners, and even a few influential journalists. She moved through the preparations like a conductor orchestrating a symphony, ensuring every detail was perfect. To her, this party was about showcasing our life, our success, a facade she wore effortlessly. To me, it was the perfect arena to pull back the curtain and reveal the truth. The night before, I stood in my office staring at the files I'd compiled over the past week. The dummy code planted in Nova Systems servers, the recorded conversations between Sophia and Elliot, and the proof of the stolen Apex algorithms were all neatly organized on a secure drive. Then there were the more personal pieces. Video footage of Sophia entering the hotel room with Elliot, their hushed conversations over dinner at an exclusive restaurant, and the text messages that alternated between flirtatious and treacherous. It was all there. Evidence of betrayal so complete, so undeniable, that no one could question its authenticity. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Part of me still couldn't believe how deep the knife had gone. Sophia hadn't just hurt me. She'd attacked everything I had built, everything I stood for, and tomorrow night she'd pay for it. The day of the party dawned bright and crisp, a rare break from the city's overcast skies. Sophia seemed in unusually high spirits as she directed the decorators, chatted with the caterers, and arranged fresh flowers in every room. "Doesn't the house look amazing?" she asked, stepping back to admire her work. "It's perfect," I said, masking my disdain with a practiced smile. If she noticed the edge in my voice, she didn't show it. The hours ticked by, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, the guests began to arrive. Apex executives mingled with investors, their laughter and conversation filling the house. The journalists snapped photos, marveling at the luxurious setting. Sophia floated through the crowd, her charm on full display. I played my role too, the proud husband, the successful CEO. I shook hands, made small talk, and pretended I didn't feel like a stranger in my own home. As the evening wore on, I checked my watch. It was almost time. I slipped away from the crowd and headed to the home theater room, where I had prepared the night's main event. The screen glowed softly in the darkened space, waiting for the command to play. "Jacob, there you are." Sophia's voice came from behind me. "The investors are asking for you. They're eager to hear your speech." "Perfect timing," I said, turning to her. "Let's give them something unforgettable." The room buzzed with anticipation as I stood before the crowd, Sophia by my side. She smiled, the picture of elegance and confidence, completely unaware of what was coming. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, my voice steady. Apex has always been about innovation, integrity, and trust. But recently, that trust has been tested in ways I never imagined. I felt the room shift, the cheerful atmosphere giving way to tension. Sophia's smile faltered, her eyes darting toward me. I pressed a button on the remote in my hand, and the screen behind me lit up. "Let me show you what I mean." The room went silent as the screen flickered to life. The first video played, a recording of Sophia and Elliot in a dimly lit hotel room. Their voices were clear, their words damning. "Jacob's too trusting," Sophia said, a glass of wine in her hand. "He has no idea we've been using Apex's data for Nova's project. By the time he figures it out, it'll be too late." The camera panned to Elliot, who smirked. "And the best part? He thinks you're planning events to help his company." The audience gasped. Heads turned toward Sophia, who stood frozen, her face pale. "Sophia?" someone whispered. I didn't stop. The next clip showed their text conversations, plans to sabotage Apex, steal proprietary information, and ensure Nova's dominance at the upcoming conference. The messages weren't just professional. They were deeply personal, overflowing with flirtation and intimacy. As the evidence piled up, the room became a storm of murmurs and shocked whispers. Investors exchanged glances, journalists scribbled furiously in their notebooks, and Sophia's expression shifted from disbelief to horror. "Jacob, stop!" she hissed, grabbing my arm. "We can talk about this later, privately." "No," I said coldly, pulling away from her. "We're not hiding this anymore." The final clip played, a recording of Sophia mocking me during a phone call with Elliot. "He still thinks I love him," she said, laughing. "As if I'd settle for a man who spends more time with his servers than his wife." The crowd recoiled. Sophia tried to speak, but her words stumbled over the gasps and accusations erupting around us. "You betrayed your husband?" one investor demanded. "And the company? This is criminal," another shouted. Sophia raised her hands, desperate to regain control. "It's not what it looks like. Jacob's exaggerating." I cut her off, my voice sharp and commanding. "Enough, Sophia. You lied to me. You lied to everyone in this room. And you thought you could get away with it." I turned to the crowd. "But there's more." With another click of the remote, the screen displayed the technical data, the stolen Apex algorithms and the sabotaged Nova Systems code. "Elliot Grayson and Nova Systems didn't just steal from Apex," I explained. "They copied our work, and I have proof. But what they don't know is that the version they're using has a fatal flaw, one I designed. At the conference, their system will fail spectacularly." The audience erupted in murmurs of disbelief and approval. Sophia's face twisted in fury. "You're ruining me, Jacob," she spat. "No, Sophia," I said, my voice ice cold. "You ruined yourself." The room exploded into chaos as Sophia stormed out, cameras flashing and voices clamoring for answers. I stood firm, watching her retreat with a mix of relief and resolve. The stage was set for the final act. The party ended in a storm of shock and whispers, with guests leaving in hurried clusters, their conversations charged with disbelief and outrage. Investors assured me they would stand by Apex, though their faces revealed lingering doubts. Journalists swarmed me for statements, but I deflected, promising a detailed press release in the coming days. Once the house was empty, I locked the doors and stood in the silence, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on me. Upstairs, I heard the faint sounds of Sophia moving about, likely packing her things. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step deliberate, until I reached our bedroom. She was there, frantically throwing clothes into a suitcase, her face streaked with tears and rage. "How could you do this to me?" she snapped when she saw me. "In front of everyone? Do you have any idea what you've just done? Do you?" I countered, my voice low but lethal. "You destroyed our marriage, our trust, and tried to ruin my company. And you think I'm the villain here?" She stopped, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the suitcase. "I made a mistake, okay? But this is beyond cruel. We could have handled this privately." I laughed bitterly. "Privately? Like how you secretly funneled my work to your lover. Or how you mocked me behind my back. No, Sophia, you made your choices. Now you deal with the consequences." Her face twisted with anger. "You think you've won, Jacob? Elliot is 10 times the man you'll ever be. He'll recover, and so will I." I stepped closer, my gaze unwavering. "Good luck with that. By now, every major investor knows the truth. Elliot's company is about to collapse. And you'll be nothing but a footnote in the scandal that takes him down." For a moment, she seemed to shrink under my words, the weight of her actions finally settling on her. Then, with a defiant tilt of her chin, she zipped up the suitcase and stormed past me. "This isn't over," she hissed as she descended the stairs. "Actually," I said, watching her go, "it is." The front door slammed shut behind her, leaving me alone in the house that now felt emptier than ever. Later that night, I sat in my office, reviewing the final steps of my plan. With Sophia out of my life, my focus shifted to Elliot. While I had planted the sabotage in Nova's systems, I wasn't done yet. I wanted to ensure his fall was as public and humiliating as possible. I drafted a comprehensive email to key industry players, detailing the stolen Apex algorithms and the fraudulent practices at Nova. Attached were the files, recordings, and legal documents proving everything. I hovered over the send button, taking a deep breath. "This is for everything," I muttered, clicking it. Within minutes, my phone began buzzing with responses. Outrage, support, and promises to take immediate action. Nova Systems wouldn't just lose its upcoming launch. It would lose its reputation, its funding, and likely its entire future. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. This was just the beginning. The morning after I sent the email, the tech world erupted. Industry blogs, news outlets, and even mainstream media picked up the story of Nova Systems' impending scandal. Headlines like, "Tech Giant Caught in Espionage Scandal," and "Apex Technologies CEO Exposes Betrayal," dominated the news cycle. I watched the chaos unfold from my office, a quiet satisfaction simmering beneath my otherwise calm exterior. This wasn't just revenge, it was justice. Elliot's public response came in the form of a hasty press conference. He stood at a podium, flanked by his legal team, attempting to downplay the allegations. "These accusations are baseless," he said, his tone defensive. "Nova Systems has always operated with integrity. We look forward to clearing our name." But even through the screen, I could see the cracks. His usual arrogance was replaced by desperation, his eyes darting nervously at the cameras. It didn't take long for the fallout to intensify. Investors pulled their funding, partners distanced themselves, and Nova's stock plummeted. By the afternoon, whispers of bankruptcy began circulating. And then came the tech conference. I attended in person, walking into the venue with the confidence of a man who knew he'd already won. Apex's booth was buzzing with excitement, our own AI product drawing crowds of curious attendees. In contrast, Nova's booth was nearly empty. Employees shuffled about, avoiding eye contact with visitors. The tension in the air was palpable. When it was time for Elliot's big presentation, I made my way to the auditorium. I wanted to see the moment his empire crumbled with my own eyes. Elliot took the stage, his expression forced and strained. He launched into his pitch, touting Nova's AI as revolutionary, but the energy in the room was lukewarm at best. Then it happened. As he demonstrated the system's capabilities, the sabotaged code kicked in. Screens flickered, commands lagged, and error messages began flooding the display. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Elliot's panic became visible. "We're experiencing technical difficulties," he stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. But it was too late. The audience wasn't just disappointed, they were suspicious. "Didn't Apex file a complaint about stolen code?" Someone whispered loudly enough to carry. "Looks like karma caught up to them," another replied, smirking. Elliot tried to regain control, but the damage was done. His credibility was shattered, and so was Nova's last chance at redemption. As I left the auditorium, I couldn't help but feel a grim sense of closure. Elliot had been crushed under the weight of his own hubris, and Sophia's betrayal had been dragged into the light. But even as the victory settled over me, I knew there was one more chapter to this story, one final piece of vengeance left to deliver. While Elliot's empire crumbled in spectacular fashion, I kept tabs on Sophia. Her departure from our home had been swift, but the fallout from her actions had only begun. Sophia had always been the picture-perfect socialite, adored for her charm and elegance. But now, her name was synonymous with betrayal, whispered in scandalous tones among the very circles she had once dominated. Her closest friends distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with the woman who had sabotaged her husband and conspired with his rival. Social invitations stopped coming, her phone fell silent, and her carefully constructed image began to unravel. I didn't hear from her directly until a week after the conference. My phone buzzed late one night, her name flashing on the screen. I debated whether to answer but eventually picked up, curious about what she could possibly have to say. "Jacob?" she began, her voice shaky, stripped of its usual confidence. "I need to talk to you." "About what?" I replied coldly. "About us. About what happened." She paused, then added in a softer tone, "I made a mistake." I let out a bitter laugh. "A mistake? Sophia, what you did wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated series of decisions. You knew exactly what you were doing." "I was confused," she said, her voice breaking. "I was scared. I felt like you were drifting away from me. So I—" "Spare me the excuses," I snapped. "You didn't betray me because you were scared. You betrayed me because you're selfish. You saw an opportunity to elevate yourself, and you took it, consequences be damned." There was a long silence on the other end. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Please, Jacob, can we meet? I need to see you." "Why?" I asked. "So you can try to manipulate me into forgiving you? Or are you hoping I'll bail you out now that your world is falling apart?" "Because I still love you," she said, her voice trembling. I didn't answer right away. Her words hung in the air, hollow and meaningless. "You don't love me," I said finally. "You love power. And now that you've lost it, you think crawling back to me will fix everything." "Jacob, please." "No," I interrupted, my voice hard. "We're done, Sophia. Don't call me again." I hung up, my hands shaking with a mix of anger and relief. Cutting her off felt like severing the last tether to a chapter of my life that had brought me nothing but pain. But as I sat there in the quiet of my office, I knew this wasn't the end. Sophia had shown me her true nature, and while I had exposed her to the world, I hadn't yet finished what I started. I turned back to my computer, pulling up the final steps of my plan. Sophia wanted to fight for survival in a world that no longer wanted her. I'd make sure she had nothing left to fight for. After Sophia's call, I knew she was desperate. Her network of allies had evaporated, her social status shattered. But it wasn't enough. She still had some leverage, connections, and favors owed from years of schmoozing high society. That couldn't last. I spent the next few days meticulously dismantling the remnants of her influence. Sophia had always been strategic with her money, but she'd overlooked one detail: our joint accounts. While I'd frozen her access to Apex's finances, she still had her personal funds tied to investments. With the help of a forensic accountant, I uncovered irregularities in her portfolio, questionable partnerships that could be flagged as potential fraud. I anonymously tipped off the firms managing her assets. Within days, her accounts were frozen pending investigation. The elegant facade she had built, luxury handbags, designer outfits, first-class flights, crumbled. Next, I compiled a dossier of her worst betrayals, carefully curated for maximum impact. Photos of her and Elliot at intimate dinners, recordings of her mocking Apex's investors, and details of her manipulative dealings in social circles. I leaked the file to a prominent gossip columnist, ensuring it would hit the upper echelons of society like a bomb. By the following morning, the story was everywhere. Power couple turned scandal. Sophia Winter's fall from grace. Her former friends gleefully turned against her, distancing themselves from the sinking ship. Invitations were revoked, sponsorships canceled. She was no longer the socialite queen. She was a pariah. Sophia had always prided herself on one thing: her ability to manipulate people. But even she had underestimated how far I was willing to go. I reached out to Elliot. "Jacob Sterling," he greeted warily when I called. "I assume this isn't a courtesy call." "It's not," I replied, my voice calm but icy. "I have a proposition for you." Elliot was on the verge of ruin, his company gutted by the sabotage and subsequent scandals. I knew he'd be desperate enough to listen. "I'll withdraw the legal complaints against Nova," I offered, "on one condition." "What's that?" he asked, skeptical. "You cut all ties with Sophia. Publicly disavow her. Make it clear she acted alone in leaking Apex's data, and ensure she takes the full brunt of the fallout." Elliot hesitated, but I could hear the gears turning in his head. Finally, he said, "Done." The next day, Elliot released a statement throwing Sophia under the bus, claiming she had manipulated him and acted without his knowledge. It was a masterstroke of deflection, and it worked partially. Sophia was left with nothing. No alice, no finances, no reputation. The last time I saw her was by chance. I was at a coffee shop downtown when she walked in. Gone were the designer clothes and confident strut. She looked disheveled, tired, a shadow of the woman who had once dominated every room she entered. Our eyes met for a brief moment. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but I simply shook my head and turned away. The chapter was closed. After Sophia's downfall, I expected to feel triumphant, but instead, there was a strange emptiness. For years, I had defined so much of my life by our partnership, even after it turned poisonous. Now, with her completely out of the picture, I was left with the rubble of what had been our life together. But rubble wasn't the end, it was the foundation for something new. I threw myself into rebuilding Apex. The damage Sophia and Elliot had caused left scars, but they also uncovered weaknesses in the company I hadn't seen before. I worked with my team to strengthen our infrastructure, innovate beyond what we'd planned, and reaffirm our core values to our investors and employees. Within months, Apex wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Professionally, things were on track, but personally, I knew I couldn't avoid facing the fallout. The betrayal had left wounds, and I couldn't pretend they didn't exist. I started seeing a therapist, a recommendation from a friend who'd noticed I was burying myself in work. At first, it felt strange to open up to a stranger about something so raw, but over time, it became a lifeline. Through therapy, I began to see the cracks in my relationship with Sophia for what they were. The distance, the lack of real communication, her growing bitterness. All were signs I'd ignored because I'd been too focused on the illusion of success. I wasn't just healing from her betrayal. I was learning to forgive myself for letting it get as far as it did. A few months later, I was at a charity event for local startups. A small, low-key gathering compared to the high-stakes party Sophia used to drag me to. I felt relaxed, content to simply blend into the background. That's when I met Emily. She was a tech journalist, sharp-witted and refreshingly grounded. We struck up a conversation about the future of AI, and what started as a professional chat turned into hours of laughter and connection. Emily wasn't flashy or manipulative. She was genuine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe around someone. We exchanged numbers, and while I didn't rush into anything, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in years: hope. One day, as I was organizing some old files, I came across the folder of evidence I'd used to expose Sophia and Elliot. For a moment, I stared at it, the memories flooding back. Then, with a deep breath, I deleted it. The past had served its purpose. It was time to stop looking back and focus on what lay ahead. Just as life seemed to settle into a rhythm, Sophia reappeared like an unwelcome ghost. It was a rainy Wednesday evening when I heard a knock on my door. I hesitated for a moment, unsure who would visit unannounced, but when I opened it, there she was. Sophia stood on the porch, drenched from the rain. Her once immaculate hair hung limp, and her eyes were red and swollen. She clutched a tattered handbag, her fingers trembling. "Jacob," she whispered, "I need your help." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Why are you here?" She flinched at the coldness in my voice but pressed on. "Everything's gone. My money, my friends, even Elliot. He abandoned me." "Good for him," I said flatly. Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. "Please just let me in. We can talk. Maybe we can fix this." "Fix this?" I repeated, incredulous. "Sophia, you didn't just betray me. You destroyed everything we built together. You humiliated me, endangered my company, and for what? Your greed? Your ego." "I wasn't thinking clearly," she said, her voice desperate. "I made mistakes, Jacob, but I loved you. I still do." I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You loved what I could give you, the life, the status. But me? You never loved me. Not the way you pretended to." She took a step forward, her voice trembling. "I'll change, Jacob. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't leave me like this." I stared at her, searching for even a hint of sincerity, but all I saw was the same manipulative woman who had torn my life apart. "You're already gone, Sophia," I said quietly. "The person I thought you were doesn't exist. You made sure of that." For a moment, she stood there, frozen, as if she hadn't expected me to stand my ground. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the rain. Closing the door, I leaned against it, exhaling deeply. Seeing her like that didn't bring satisfaction, only a sense of finality. For years, I'd built my life around Sophia, only to realize it had been a house of cards. But now I was free. As the rain continued to fall, I poured myself a drink and sat in the living room, the quiet hum of the house enveloping me. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Sophia was out of my life, and I intended to keep it that way. In the weeks following Sophia's final visit, life began to feel lighter. With her gone, I focused on rebuilding not just my company but also myself. For the first time in years, I found clarity and purpose outside of the chaos she had brought into my world. One Saturday, I decided to revisit an old hobby: woodworking. It had been a passion of mine before Apex consumed my time, but I'd set it aside during my years with Sophia. She had always considered it unrefined and discouraged me from pursuing it. As I dusted off my tools and began working on a small coffee table for my living room, I felt a sense of peace. The rhythmic sound of the saw, the smell of freshly cut wood. It grounded me in a way I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just a table. It was a reminder that I could still create, still build something from nothing. I also began reconnecting with people I had distanced myself from during my marriage. Old friends, family members, and even colleagues who had been pushed aside by Sophia's manipulations welcomed me back with open arms. One evening, I met my brother, Daniel, for dinner. We hadn't spoken much during my marriage. Sophia had always dismissed him as too plain and not ambitious enough. But sitting across from him now, laughing over childhood memories, I realized how much I had missed him. "Glad to have you back, Jacob," Daniel said, raising his glass. "The real you." I clinked my glass with his. Glad to be back. Emily, the journalist I'd met at the charity event, continued to be a presence in my life. We started seeing each other casually. Dinners, long walks, and conversations that stretched late into the night. She was nothing like Sophia, and that was precisely what drew me to her. Where Sophia had been demanding and critical, Emily was warm and supportive. She didn't need to dominate the spotlight. She was content to simply share it. One evening, as we sat on my newly built coffee table, she leaned back and looked at me thoughtfully. "You've been through hell, Jacob," she said, "but you came out stronger. That's rare." I smiled, her words sinking in. For so long, I'd seen myself as the victim of Sophia's betrayal. But Emily made me realize that surviving it and thriving despite it was its own kind of victory. With Apex back on solid ground, I began exploring new ventures. Expanding into sustainable technology had always been a dream of mine, and now I had the freedom to pursue it. For the first time in years, I felt like my life was truly mine again. No manipulations, no hidden agendas, just possibilities. Months passed, and Sophia became a distant memory. Her name no longer triggered anger or pain. It was just a part of my past. But life has a way of bringing unresolved chapters to a close, and Sophia wasn't quite done with hers. One afternoon, as I was leaving a meeting at Apex, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. Hesitant, I answered. "Jacob Sterling?" a man's voice asked. "Yes. Who's this?" "This is Detective Ramirez with the Financial Crimes Division. We're reaching out because your ex-wife, Sophia Winter, has been implicated in a series of fraud cases. We were hoping you could assist us with some questions." I felt my stomach tighten. "Fraud cases?" "Yes," Ramirez continued. "She's been accused of embezzling funds from several social organizations she was involved with. We understand you might have insight into her financial dealings during your marriage." I paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Sophia's greed and deceit had finally caught up with her. "I'll cooperate in any way I can," I said. "Send me the details." The next day, I met with Ramirez at the precinct. He laid out the case. Over the past few years, Sophia had siphoned funds from charities and social events under the guise of administrative costs. The amount totaled hundreds of thousands of dollars, and now that her allies had abandoned her, there was no one left to protect her. I handed over what little information I had, old bank records, details of her spending habits, and the evidence I'd collected during our divorce. "She's always been resourceful," I said, "but not in the way you'd hope." Ramirez nodded. "Her trial will likely be public. Cases like this tend to make headlines." Good, I thought. Let the world see who she truly is. Weeks later, Sophia's trial began, and the media swarmed it. Stories of her extravagant spending and underhanded dealings painted a picture of a woman who thrived on manipulation. Despite her attempts to appear remorseful, the evidence against her was overwhelming. Witnesses testified, documents were presented, and her former friends, now scorned, offered damning accounts of her behavior. I didn't attend the trial, but I followed the updates. On the final day, the judge delivered the verdict. Guilty. Sophia was sentenced to several years in prison and ordered to repay the stolen funds. The news left me with mixed emotions. I didn't feel joy or triumph, just a quiet sense of closure. Sophia's downfall was her own doing, and now she was facing the consequences. It was the final piece of the puzzle, the last chapter in a story that had once consumed me. As I sat on my back porch that evening, watching the sunset, I felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. Sophia was no longer a part of my life, not in memory, not in fear, and not in consequence. I had moved on, and nothing could drag me back into the darkness she had created. Sophia's sentencing marked the end of an era in my life. A long, painful chapter of betrayal and heartbreak finally closed. I felt no need to dwell on her anymore. The future stretched ahead, bright and full of possibilities. With Sophia and Elliot behind me, I turned my full attention to the expansion of Apex. The Sustainable Technology Division was taking off, and our latest project, a renewable energy-powered data center, was gaining international attention. It felt good to focus on creating something meaningful, something that aligned with my values. The success of Apex wasn't just professional. It was personal. It reminded me that despite everything, I could still build, grow, and thrive. Emily became a constant in my life. We didn't rush things. We both had our share of scars to heal. But over time, what started as friendship turned into something deeper. One evening, as we sat on my back porch watching the stars, she turned to me with a curious smile. "You've been through so much, Jacob," she said. "How do you stay so grounded?" I thought about it for a moment before answering. Because I know what it's like to lose everything, and I know how precious it is to rebuild. I don't take anything for granted anymore. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and for the first time in years, I felt a warmth I hadn't realized I'd been missing. I also found myself drawn to causes I'd once ignored. With Sophia gone, I realized how much I wanted to make a difference in the community. Apex began funding initiatives for young entrepreneurs and donating resources to local charities. One day, as I toured a youth innovation center Apex had sponsored, I saw the excitement and passion in the kids' faces. It reminded me of why I started Apex in the first place. "You're not just rebuilding your life," Emily said later, as we walked through the center. "You're helping others build theirs too." One quiet night, I pulled out a journal and began writing, a habit I'd picked up during therapy. I jotted down the lessons I'd learned through the ordeal. Trust is earned, not assumed. Betrayal, though painful, can be the beginning of growth. True strength lies in how you rebuild after being broken. As I closed the journal, I realized I wasn't writing for myself anymore. Maybe someday someone else could learn from my story. The darkness Sophia had brought into my life was gone, replaced by light, hope, and purpose. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I was ready to face it. It's been over a year since Sophia's sentencing, and life feels like it belongs to me again. The storm she brought into my world left me battered, but it didn't break me. If anything, it made me stronger. Apex Technologies is no longer just a company. It's a symbol of resilience. We've expanded into fields I never dreamed of, with cutting-edge projects that are making waves in the industry. The renewable energy-powered data center became the foundation of our green initiatives, and we've since partnered with global organizations to bring sustainable technology to underserved regions. I find pride in knowing that Apex is no longer just about profits. It's about making an impact. Emily and I have grown closer, though we take things one step at a time. She's taught me the value of patience and reminded me that not all connections are built on deception. One night, as we watched the northern lights during a trip to Alaska, a bucket list item we both shared, I turned to her and said, "Thank you for showing me that it's okay to trust again." She smiled, her eyes shimmering in the colorful glow. "And thank you for letting me in." I've begun sharing my story with others, speaking at conferences and writing articles about overcoming betrayal and finding strength in adversity. It's cathartic, but more than that, it's a way to turn my pain into something meaningful. During a Q&A session after one of my talks, someone asked, "If you could go back and change what happened, would you?" The question gave me pause. For a long time, my answer would have been a resounding yes. But now, with the clarity of hindsight, I shook my head. "No," I said, "because it made me who I am today. It taught me to value honesty, to cherish the people who stand by me, and to never underestimate my own ability to rise again." The applause that followed wasn't just for my words. It was for the journey I had survived. Sophia's chapter in my life is closed, and Elliot's downfall is a distant memory. I no longer think about revenge or justice. Those battles are behind me, and I've emerged from them a better man. My story isn't one of loss. It's one of transformation. Betrayal may have been the catalyst, but resilience and growth were the outcomes. And as I sit here, watching the sun set over the horizon, I know one thing for certain. The best chapters of my life are still unwritten.